So he defined for us that when he is talking about leaven, he's talking about hypocrisy. So now when we go back and think about the idea that they were not bringing hypocrisy out of Egypt, they were not bringing hypocrisy with them into what they were doing as they were being rescued out of slavery. And so I'm going to propose that hypocrisy might lead to some sense of enslavement. Hypocrisy may ensnare you and make you feel trapped. I mean, this is what they were rescued out of, was a world and a place filled with hypocrisy. And so we saw that there are 7 places in Matthew 23 where Yeshua says, "Woe unto you, Pharisees, you hypocrites. You scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites." And now he's going to describe some of what they were doing that was hypocritical. And so what I want us to do is go through this section here in Matthew 23. And while we're doing it, I want you to ask the question, what does this look like today? And more importantly, what does it look like in my life? We tend to micro-focus, though, on the 1 or 2 pieces that we get emotionally invested in. And if you get emotionally invested, now you've got an exalting issue going on. Think of that. If you get emotionally invested, and by the way, that's why you get offended when people don't agree with you, because now you're emotionally committed to that idea. Because now what's happened is that idea has become a part of who you are as an identifying piece. And once it becomes a part of who you are, you've exalted yourself in some way. Because now you are synonymous with this idea or this piece of Torah, this piece of walk. You see how you can be involved in all of this? You have to be really careful. Because of this, you shall receive a greater judgment. Now, when you see the phrase greater judgment, what should we be triggering? We talked about it during the Midrash today. We talked about it the other day. The teachers are responsible on such a high level that they receive a greater judgment. So when you see this, we're talking about teachers. People in leadership teaching positions should not be taking advantage of those that are weaker, like the widows, okay, and eat up their houses, make big showy things to, remember the beginning of this chapter was those who were walking in the marketplace to be seen by men and exalt themselves. Hey, remember, we've talked about this a lot during the Midrash. Context, context, context. The context of this chapter, all the way through where we're going to end, is all about self-aggrandizing, self-exalting, to be seen by men. It's not the humble servant. It's the opposite. It's hypocrisy. So this blindness, this foolishness that they're exhibiting here, fools and blind, is one who the Father has given eyes to see, yet chooses not to walk in accordance with what they've seen. And I say that because this foolishness and blindness is in the middle of the section about hypocrisy. And so this is not just a foolish person who doesn't know better, or a blind person that really can't see. Otherwise, it would make no sense to stick that in the middle of this thing about hypocrisy. And so there's got to be some hypocrisy that's causing the foolishness and the blindness. But they're just traditions. So he says, look, as long as you don't turn it into Torah, I'll give you an example. Almost all of you pray before you eat. There's no commandment to do that. It's a good tradition. But I've seen some people smack their children who started to eat before they prayed. Let's de-escalate that a little bit. They did break a tradition, and they were maybe disrespectful of your instruction, but make sure you're not treating it as if they sinned or something. Do you understand what I'm saying? You may still need to discipline them because they need to respect your decisions and your traditions. But be careful you don't elevate the tradition to make it Torah. That's where we end up with trouble. Tithing is very basic. It's very simple. Doesn't require anybody but you. You don't have to interact with anybody to do it. You don't have to even interact with Yahweh to do it. You just take your increase and you take 10% of it, you put it aside, and that's it. It's not that difficult. It's basic. It's simple. But when it comes to the right ruling and compassion and the belief, this is much more difficult. This takes a change in you. in your character, in how you treat other people. Now, I understand that there are some social advantages to being able to put on a good front, a good face. But there's also an hypocrisy where you now start convincing yourself that you're okay when you're not okay. So I'm not condemning those of you that can come to a social activity where there's going to be other people and you can put on that good face. Actually, that's probably a good thing that you do that. It's good for people not to have to be brought down and brought into your maelstrom of whatever mess you have going on. But then be careful you don't convince yourself you're okay when you're not okay. Because you could be so good at pretending that you convince yourself. Look, some of you would be throwing rocks at Yeshua for eating with the publicans, the tax collectors and the sinners, like, oh, look at what they're doing. Because you're doing that now. You're pointing at people and saying, oh, look at what they're doing. Well, you don't know what they're doing. You don't even know why they're there. You're making assumptions, and you don't know. Especially if it's leadership that may be meeting with somebody for a reason. But you might be around with those guys that were pointing the finger even at Yeshua, because he did things that you would not have thought were right. As we see in this section here from verse 25 to about 34, is an outward appearance that's contrary to an inward truth. It's contrary to an inward truth. And so this is what we need to understand. We have to make sure that our outward appearance is congruent with the inward reality. And so if the inward reality is not right, let's get it fixed. Let's counsel and get it fixed so that we're not walking in hypocrisy. And may Abba bring us more people that are qualified to counsel. Because I know a lot of you, the reason you're in trouble is you know you need counsel and you're getting counsel from all the wrong people. And they only make it worse.